Riots break out following a grand jury decision not to indict two of the officers involved in the Breonna Taylor shooting. And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passes away at age 87, much to the dismay of many Democrats who wish to not have her seat filled by a conservative. Welcome to the podcast. This podcast broadcasts at 2 o'clock on Sundays. You can view it then or anytime you like throughout the week. Also, consider subscribing as it helps the channel out, and if you don't like the content, you can always unsubscribe at a later date. It's free and it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, so please consider pressing that button. So for the first news of the week, a grand jury has decided to bring no indictments against two of the three officers involved in the Breonna Taylor case. One officer was charged with 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment. Now, contrary to some belief out there, this was not due to him endangering the life of Breonna Taylor or her boyfriend, who was there at the time. This was due to him shooting through some kind of screen door or blinds where he didn't have line of sight on what could be behind it. This was a violation of department policy in Louisville, and this led to him being charged. The bullet went into an adjacent apartment, and that's all the evidence the grand jury could find. So there seems to be some misconceptions out there about exactly what happened to result in this. And the first off is that this was not a decision by the Kentucky Attorney General himself to not pursue charges. That's a completely different scenario. This was a decision by a grand jury that there was not enough evidence to indict those officers. Now, what a grand jury decides is, based on the evidence provided by the prosecution, is there enough evidence to warrant a trial? So what happens in these situations is, in this case, the Attorney General will take all of the evidence and witnesses that he plans to bring forth at a trial, and he takes them before a grand jury, and he basically says, can we indict on this? And the jury basically decides if the evidence is convincing enough to warrant a trial. This isn't beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not an acquittal of the defendants either. The defendants could still be charged at a later time if more evidence was to come forward. However, that seems very unlikely right now. And now grand jury decisions are kept secret by design. And this is to keep defendants from being bashed in the court of public opinion because someone decided to release the grand jury decision making. It's also to keep the public from pressuring grand juries to make indictments in cases where there is not enough evidence to prosecute. This, of course, did not stop the lawyer for Breonna Taylor's family, the absolutely awful Ben Crump, from calling on the Kentucky Attorney General to release the evidence in grand jury decision making, which again is private by design. Now, you may remember Ben Crump from such great statements as Breonna Taylor was sleeping when the cops breached her house. That turned out to be false. She was wide awake and standing right next to her boyfriend when they breached her house and when her boyfriend fired the gun. He's also known for the Jacob Blake case, where he said that, where he stated that Jacob Blake was just there helping to break up a domestic disturbance between two women where they were fighting, instead of the actual facts, which was he went to the woman's house, raped her in her bed, and then was resisted arrest and was shot in the back while reaching to the floorboards of his car for a knife after throwing 2 cops off of him and withstanding 2 tasers. Now, this, of course, is no surprise that Ben Crump is doing this. He clearly does it before, and his goal is to get the best settlement he can for his clients and take 1/3 of the money, according to his website. And this is actually true. If you look at his record and you look at his fees, he's a catastrophic injury lawyer. So in these cases, he takes 1/3 of all the settlement money. So who remembers the $12 million settlement that Breonna Taylor's family just got? Well, his firm got $4 million from that. That's basically what just happened. So now, of course, there was very little evidence from the get-go to indict these officers on. And as far as I can tell, most people who have been following the case really well and haven't just been regurgitating the narrative have actually been saying this for a long time. Now, I can't say with perfect accuracy what's going on, but I will let the Attorney General Daniel Cameron here speak for himself on this.
Are conducting that investigation. Sergeant Mattingly and Detectives Cosgrove and Hankinson had no known involvement in the preceding investigation or obtainment of the search warrant. They were called into duty as extra personnel to effectuate the service of the search warrant. They only had information conveyed to them during their prior briefing. Evidence shows that officers both knocked and announced their presence at the apartment. The officers' statements about their announcement are corroborated by an independent witness who was near in proximity to apartment 4. In other words, the warrant was not served as a no-knock warrant. When officers were unable to get anyone to answer or open the door to apartment 4, the decision was made to breach the door. After breaching the door, Sergeant Mattingly was the first and only officer to enter the residence. Sergeant Mattingly identified 2 individuals standing beside one another at the end of the hall, a male and a female. In his statement, he says that the male was holding a gun, arms extended, in a shooting stance. Sergeant Mattingly saw the man's gun fire, heard a boom, and immediately knew he was shot as a result of feeling heat in his upper thigh. Kenneth Walker fired the shot that hit Sergeant Mattingly, and there is no evidence to support that Sergeant Mattingly was hit by friendly fire from other officers. Mr. Walker admitted that he fired one shot and was the first to shoot. In addition to all the testimony, the ballistics report shows that the round that struck Sergeant Mattingly was fired from a 9mm handgun. The LMPD officers fired 40 caliber handguns. Sergeant Mattingly returned fire down the hallway. Mattingly fired 6 shots. Almost simultaneously, Detective Cosgrove, also in the doorway, shot 16 times. This all took place in a matter of seconds. In total, 6 bullets struck Ms.
So I don't think that I could put that much better myself. When you look at the facts of the case here, it's pretty clear that this was the cops entered the building, they had a valid search warrant, and by the way, the warrant was initially a no-knock warrant. They were not required to knock on the door. And in fact, if you listen to how this played out, it's pretty clear that had they not knocked in the first place, Breonna Taylor might still be alive today because her boyfriend might not have had the time to get up and get his gun and then shoot at the police officers. Now, there is some debate over whether he could hear the officers announce themselves. That is still up for question. However, the point is that regardless of how this happened, the officers did execute the warrant correctly. They were met with gunfire, they returned fire, and in a tragic situation, Breonna Taylor was killed. This does not make her death good. This does not make her death okay. I am a huge proponent of Rand Paul's Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, which bans no-knock warrants in most of these cases. Now, of course, the Attorney General continued his speech, and he went on to say that there would be outside agitators and people will try and twist the narrative. The narrative for months has been Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed when the police broke into her apartment and shot her in cold blood. That the evidence does not match this in any way whatsoever. It just does not mesh with reality. But this has not stopped people from saying it. So here's Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron saying that this is exactly what's going to happen.
There will be celebrities, influencers, and activists who, having never lived in Kentucky, will try to tell us how to feel, suggesting they understand the facts of this case and that they know our community and the Commonwealth better than we do. But they don't. Let's not give in to their attempts to influence our thinking or capture our emotions. At the end of the day, it is up to us. We live here together. We work here and raise our families here together. I urge those protesting on the streets to remember this. Peaceful protests are your right as an American citizen. Instigating violence and destruction are not. I've spoken with both Mayor Fisher and Governor Beshears in the days leading up to this announcement, and I urge them to do what is necessary to maintain law and order and to protect our cities and our people. We have a long road ahead, both as we pursue this case through the criminal system and as we address the pain in the Louisville community. I'm committed to being part of the healing process. When tragedy occurs, we must mourn. We must also do everything we can to prevent it from happening again. Today, consistent with that view, I'm announcing that I will create a task force to review the process for securing, reviewing, and executing search warrants in Kentucky. The task force will consist of a variety of stakeholders, including citizens, members from the law enforcement community, representatives from the judiciary, defense attorneys, and elected leaders.
True and great things. Absolutely every case whatsoever. Just true and great things. Ignore YouTube deciding to play ads at the end of clips that I would love to just play on their own. So as you can see there, this is absolutely true, and he says some great things. Reviewing the process for obtaining no-knock warrants in the state of Kentucky, that is an amazing step forward as far as civil rights as a whole go. If this warrant was predicated on a no-knock warrant, which they still knocked and announced themselves, if the procedures are being revised to make it so that cops announce themselves in more situations and do better at announcing themselves, that goes a huge way to making it so that there are fewer deaths going on in the future. Now, of course, this hasn't stopped some people from going to call the Kentucky Attorney General and Uncle Tom and all kinds of derogatories for the great shame of following the law. Again, it is a tragedy that Breonna Taylor died, but it was not his job to prosecute this case with feelings. And he seems emotionally invested in it too, which is the problem. He seems like he wanted this case to go through. There was not enough evidence to take this case to trial from the start, but he still put it up to a grand jury and said, give me something to do here. Give me something to say so that we don't have massive riots. Give me something to say so that we have justice. And the only thing the grand jury returned were 3 charges against 1 officer for first-degree wanton endangerment. Now, of course, none of his advice was heeded, and immediately protests across the nation broke out and were extremely violent. In Louisville alone, 24 people were arrested on rioting charges, including a state lawmaker. These are state lawmakers going out and rioting in the streets with the looters and the protesters. These are people on the left who do not care about the systems. They want to tear down the systems. And there is no great way around that fact. There's no way to look at this situation, look at the facts, and say these people really want reform. The Democrats in the Senate killed Rand Paul's Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. They killed it. They put a hold on it, and it has not made it anywhere since it was introduced. And Rand Paul is a libertarian. He would love nothing more than to see the end of no-knock warrants. Now, of course, that doesn't suggest that anything would have changed here, but it is an actual reform. It's not just words on paper, it is actual reform. So some protesters were so mad at the result of this that they just decided, let's go beat up some random people. And you know what? Here's a great clip of protesters just deciding, hey, let's go beat up random people. So on the right side there, you can see a Prius. It's driving through. It's just trying to get past. They start beating it up. He starts driving away. And you'll see a truck in the bottom there, and people are going to start chasing after it. He's driving down the road, and there's the truck, there's motorcycles, and they're basically going to run this person down and start trying to beat them up. Yes, because this is justice for Breonna Taylor. Cutting off a Prius, getting out, and beating up the driver for the great sin of trying to get home. This happened in LA, by the way, where these protests are pretty common, as far as I can tell. So there he goes. He's just beating up the driver for the great sin of they didn't stop. Driver tries to back up. Another car blocks him in.
They're trying to grab the driver. They're trying to grab the driver of the car. This is getting ugly really, really quick. Really quick. That pickup pulled right in front of the car. Now you have protesters beating up that driver, trying to get through the crowd. And here he goes again. He's stepping on it, and they're going to follow him. Look at that. Multiple protest vehicles that chased him up the block.
So luckily, as far as I can tell, the driver did get away. I don't think that he was very harmed in this, and thank God for that, because I can only imagine what would have happened had they actually gotten to this guy. And this, of course, leads to the larger narrative that's at play, because I can't think of any other reason that you would go and just beat up random people on the street screaming justice for Breonna Taylor than this isn't actually about justice for Breonna Taylor. This is about a larger narrative at play. And the parts of this larger narrative are that America is systemically racist, and thus, if you are not trying to tear down the system, you somehow support it. This was amazingly shown at Yale not too long ago, where the president of Yale basically came out and said, "Oh yes, we all have systemic racism," and the great irony of that was, of course, the Justice Department immediately began investigating Yale for, you guessed it, discrimination and racism, which the sweet irony of the higher education system getting what's been coming to it for a very long time. I can only sit here and just chuckle and enjoy it. This, of course, leads to the second argument that all the systems are racist, and all racist systems must be torn down. So, as you can see here, there is a beautiful line saying, "Abolish the police," with Antifa. You can see people carrying shields. These are not people who showed up looking for a peaceful protest. Later on, you can see these people basically devolved into rioters. They're wearing all black. That is part of the Antifa uniform, which is designed to make you less identifiable. And I think my favorite part is the astonishing lack of minorities that I can view in this crowd. The absolutely astonishing lack of minorities I can see here, because this looks to be mostly white young millennials and like just young white men and women. I can maybe see one or two minorities in the entire crowd there, and that really just shows how dissociated from the actual issues the left is here. And the third part of the narrative, of course, is that the left doesn't care about the actual justice. They want justice for the narrative and not the facts. The facts of the case do not support a murder charge. It's just plain and simple. They don't. And as much as we may want justice, justice in this case doesn't involve charging 3 officers with homicide where there's no evidence to support those charges. They went in there to execute a valid warrant. They announced themselves despite the fact that they didn't need to, and were met with gunfire. And in returning fire on the person shooting them, Breonna Taylor was right next to him. A tragedy occurred in which she was accidentally shot. And again, it is an absolute tragedy. But the left doesn't care about the facts. They don't care that it was a tragedy, and they don't care about the reform. They care about the narrative. because the narrative is all that matters in this case. So, on to some more news. Now, as most people I believe will know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died Friday, September 18th. I think that it is not far to say that a lot of people will miss the justice who unequivocally fought for women's rights throughout her entire career. She has a great body of legal work behind her, and while I may disagree with a lot of the positions she took on things and a lot of her decision making on the court, it is not far off at all to say she has done some amazing things for women's rights. She will be the first woman to lie in state at the Capitol, which is an amazing accomplishment for the justice, and I think for all women in general is, again, an amazing accomplishment. Now, of course, this leaves a vacancy on the Supreme Court, which the Republicans are obviously trying to fill. Now, there's this belief going around that the president should wait for the election to be over to decide who nominates the next person. This is not true at all. There's been 27 times in the past where this specific scenario has happened. In 10 of the times where the president and the party are different, only 2 times has anyone ever been appointed. That's 20% of the time. And in the other 17 times where the president and the party have been the same, the nomination gets approved 100% of the time. So this idea that the Democrats are pushing that Trump should just wait for the election, it's not founded. This is also Trump's first term. This is not his last term. And most of this is, of course, predicated on what Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham said in the 2016 election, which was partially, and I want to emphasize the partially part, partially that it was an election year, so we should wait to see who wins. Now, the problem with that is that Obama was a lame duck president already. The Senate wasn't Democrat controlled, it was Republican controlled. And the Republicans were saying, well, hold on, we have like an election in 8 months here. You're leaving at the end of this year, and we control the Senate. We have no duty to approve your nomination. Of course, this didn't stop Democrats from saying you should just approve his nomination, even though you disagree in every way with his policies and with who he's appointing. So now they're saying, oh, well, you're not holding yourself to the same standard, except that the other part of the standard was, well, we're not the same party as you, so we have no duty to appoint. And that's where the actual problem lies. The Republicans are the same party as the presidency this time, so they can appoint. They have the power and they have the duty to confirm this nomination and appoint the nominee. Now, this, of course, led some Democrats, I'm looking at you, Robert Kennedy, to threaten to pack the Supreme Court if Trump's nominee gets approved. Now, this is stupid, because say you put 4 justices on right now. Well, what's going to stop if the Republicans take control from adding 6 more justices and making it 21 seats instead of 13? And then it just keeps going until eventually somebody stops the madness of trying to pack the courts for political leverage. So, of course, this is a terrible idea, and now the Democrats are backing off of it because it turns out that most Americans don't like it when you try and weight the political scales all the way to your side of the aisle. Now, as I said, the Senate is still in Republican control, and this means that most Republicans right now are signaling support as long as Trump's nominee is qualified. Now, yesterday, Trump nominated Judge Amy Coney Barrett from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. She seems to have a very good record. She is a devout Catholic, although it seems to not have impacted her judicial record at all. And I can only hope that she doesn't get nearly as much of the flack that Kavanaugh got. And I don't think that I could say my opinion on how these nominations go through any better than Lindsey Graham himself said, when he basically looked at people who were saying, well, aren't you being hypocritical about pushing through this nomination, and said, listen, after what you guys put Kavanaugh through, I changed my mind. And I feel the same way. So, things that you should probably expect going forward with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett is they're going to attack her Catholicism. Now, I'm not a particularly devout Catholic, but I do still consider myself Catholic. And I can say the absolute amount of apathy or hatred that the Democrats treat religious people with is absurd. And you're going to see this on full display as the Democrats are going to ask open questions about, well, you consider yourself religious, right? Well, that makes you disqualified to stay on the court. That is not a disqualifying factor. You can be a religious person and still do your job perfectly well. It is not disqualifying to be religious on the court. You've already seen people like Dianne Feinstein go over this. When she was appointed to the Seventh Circuit Court, she made the exact same statement. They would love for there to be a religious test where anything less than non-religious is not acceptable. So, of course, this is all part of this golden calf idolatry surrounding Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now, I say this, and let me explain. So, for those of you who don't know, the story of the golden calf is a Christian and Jewish story in the Bible. It comes from Exodus, where basically Moses goes all the way up to the top of Mount Sinai, and as he's getting the Ten Commandments, which are basically the fundamental basics of human rights and the fundamental basics of laws across all of Western society, the Jews down at the bottom of the mountain melt down all of their gold, and they raise up this golden calf and proclaim it the new God. Which is basically they just cast God aside and say, no, this is our God. And I can't help but feel the same way about this scenario. I've seen people going around saying that with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies women's rights. That somehow Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the sole person granting women the right to vote, the right to own property. That is absolutely not true. And I sincerely doubt that Judge Amy Coney Barrett, a woman, is going to go and overturn those rights. I sincerely doubt it. I even sincerely doubt that she's actually going to go and overturn Roe v. Wade. Even if she did, you maybe have 2 votes on the entire Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Kavanaugh's not going to do it. Gorsuch is not going to do it. Both of them are frankly too conservative to overturn it because they believe in the precedent. And since Roe v. Wade created the precedent, they're not really going to go against it. Of course, this all comes with the wailing and crying of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the streets because she is some godlike figure who deserves absolute worship by people. And I couldn't help but find this video of a crazy lady being crazy after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I found a censored version because, frankly, the amount of cursing might be too much for some people. No, it's just because I didn't want to go find the uncensored version. But anyway, here's a crazy lady being crazy about the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Holy you guys! I'm driving your car, but I just got a notification that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died! Could this year get any worse? Ruth, you just had to make it to 2021!
So, as I said, crazy lady being crazy there. And as I said, this is this kind of golden calf idolatry. Ruth, you just had to make it to 2021. She's gone through how many bouts of cancer treatment over the years? I mean, in reality, I'm not trying to bash dead people here, but she should have stepped down back in 2014 when she first got diagnosed, and when the Senate would probably have confirmed someone like Merrick Garland to be on the court. But she took a risk in 2016 and said, I'm going to stay here for as long as I can. And it was really just to spite Trump. According to her family, her dying wish was to have the next president appoint the Supreme Court, was to appoint the person to fill her seat. This is completely contrary, of course, to what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said about the Republicans not filling the seat with Merrick Garland, where she said, well, they should fill the seat. So, again, this is complete golden calf idolatry. It is people treating her as if she should have lived forever, and that somehow not anyone else, she granted people these unalienable rights. So, of course, when Trump goes to visit her body in the Capitol, he is met with boos and chants of vote him out. And here's just an amazing clip of people thinking that Trump is absolutely evil for mourning the death of a Supreme Court justice. So as you can see there, just, again, crazy people being crazy. Ruth Bader Ginsburg being some kind of a martyr. I frankly don't understand it all that much. And I can, again, I've tried to look past this kind of stuff for so long. All of the treatment that these leftist figures get from not only the media, but from the people and from the party. And I can only describe it as a religion. And you know what, really, it shouldn't come that surprising. There is this big feeling among the left that the system, not liberals, like not the moderate liberals that do, plenty of them do exist, but there are these hardcore leftists who are becoming a large portion of the Democratic Party, who think that these systems just need to be overthrown and that we need to replace the country as a whole. And if you look at any authoritarian country, one of the first things they do is they get rid of or they change the religion to be one that worships the state first. And that's the only way I can describe this. Thank you for watching the show. If you liked it, please consider subscribing. This show is self-produced and every little bit helps. Also, share it with your friends if you like it. And if you don't, again, you can always unsubscribe at a later date. It's free to subscribe, so make sure to hit that button. Check back in with you next week.